Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's great to be here, and it's great to be standing here. Lori and I were talking about a possible theme for the month and came up with the idea of interconnections, interdependence, and from there it came upon me to talk about mentorship. And that's what I'm going to do this morning. I'm going to talk to you in particular about one mentor of mine, maybe tell some stories, but also talk about how I think that we have the capability to guide not only our experience with mentors, but the legacy of our mentors after the fact. If you don't know me, I'm Leah Disney, and I'm the music director here, but I'm also, thank you, I'm also a musicologist at the University of Tennessee, which means that I talk about music history a whole lot. And this was a trap. So this is going to be a 75-minute lecture about revolving Hocket rhythm in a 15th century mass by William of someplace. I also thought about a joke of they put a drummer in charge. So pick whichever one you like the most. They both will be relevant, and that's, if I have a superpower, that's one. I'll interweave things in later, even if you don't think it matters. My mentor was a person named Joseph Rasmussen. And Joseph Rasmussen was my percussion instructor when I was in undergraduate studies at Tennessee Tech University. He was, besides being my percussion instructor there, one of the first percussion majors at a university in this country. And I think that's an important historical backdrop because it illustrates something that's kind of important and a little bit unique. Now, obviously you could learn drums before then, but you went to a university music school where you could learn about classical music, study violin, study piano, and you said, no thanks, I want to be a percussionist. The answer was no. You had to go apprentice with a professional player in an orchestra or attached to a military band or somewhere else, perhaps find a jazz drummer. Joseph Rasmussen was one of the first people to be a percussion major, started off that way at a university in Wisconsin, when him and 4 other people went to the dean of the music school and pled their case. And because of this, there's a group called the Wisconsin Five, and he is one of them. So this isn't just to brag about my teacher, it's to put something in illustration. I am a 2nd-generation percussion major, and I'm standing before you, and I'm 42. There was 1 generation, maybe 2, depending on whether you count conservatories and universities as the same thing or not, before me. It does not go that far back. Joseph Rasmussen studied at Juilliard, studied at Wisconsin, and he was ABD all but dissertation in ethnomusicology, which is not quite the same as musicology in that it usually means studying non-Western classical music. And he studied West African drumming and West African drumming culture. I met Mr. Rasmussen when I was a high schooler. I first threw a phone call because I lived in Knoxville. I'd never been to Cookeville. I would be there soon, but I had not been yet. And he gave me a phone call because he heard I was interested in Tennessee Tech. I was interested in Tennessee Tech because my band director had gone to Tennessee Tech. And that's how these things tend to go for one reason or another. When I met him in person, through an interview and with an audition, I was immediately struck by how consistent and even he was as a person. No matter what type of chaos was going on, and immediately, upon walking into the music building, I was confronted with sounds and sights and crashes and booms and stuff dropping and people riding the gong like it was a surfboard. That was me. But no matter what was going on, he just remained even-keeled, kind of corrected us as needed, but always steady, always calm. He was my mentor in that way, and he was a mentor for me at a time when I was away from home for more than a couple of days for the first time in my life. My children are struck by this. They don't believe it because they've traveled a lot, but I had never, other than maybe going to Myrtle Beach 4 or 5 days or so, I'd never been away from home. So I settled into Tennessee Tech, and after that 5-day mark went past, it was like Samwise in The Hobbit. This is the farthest, or the longest in this case, I'd ever been away from home. And he was somebody that I could look to for that consistency, for that calm, for that stability. I don't know if you've met college freshmen, but they don't always have that. And he was there for that very important thing. He was away from home too. He lived in Nashville. Nashville is not Cookeville. It's about an hour or so away. Probably a little bit more. It's been a while since I actually thought about it. But he was always there anyway, for all of our performances, for all of our lessons, for all of our concerts. And by performances versus concerts, I mean he was there front row for my senior recital, 8 o'clock at night, just as he was there for everything else. Consistent, patient, and wise. Mr. Rasmussen imbued us all with some things that I felt were really important. He imbued us with a sense of history regarding our craft, including a balanced and realistic perspective of percussion's place in a traditional music school. As I mentioned, in a lot of ways, it's still somewhat a new thing, and it's still sometimes treated as, here's your core classical curriculum, and here's this other thing. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but when you have people that are hardcore dedicated to classical music and you approach them and say, we're going to have a West African drum ensemble, it can be met with a bit of pushback. When I decided to study musicology, which means music history, which means doing that as a career, there were a lot of questions about the viability of that path. There were a lot of questions about where would I go to study it, and if the time and the effort, potentially money, sunk into it, would be worth the outcome. At that point, I was a junior, and I remember going to his office and presenting him with these questions. He was essentially PhD'd in ethnomusicology, and I'll never forget the way that he sat there in his office with me and said, someone's gonna do it. Why can't it be you? Might as well be you. Someone's gonna do it. You have to forgive me for historical and accuracy purposes. I will use my old name. Why not Dale Disney? Why can't it be you? And he used his knowledge of ethnomusicology and started giving me readings. And this professor who traveled from Nashville started having second lessons with me every week, giving me to-do lists. Go read this. Go read this by Bruno Nettle. Go read this about medieval music by Jeremy Yudkin. Come back next week and we're going to talk about it. And I did. If not for that extra time that he put into finding out why not Leah Disney, it would have never been able to happen. I'll tell you one more brief story before I give you some more thoughts about the idea of mentorship overall. One time it was fall break and we still had of all things, a music history class left, and it was a music history class on Friday, and it was fall break, and it was Friday, and it was my lesson time on Thursday. And I said, after this, Mr. Rasmussen, I'm going home. And it was the opposite conversation. He said, Mr. Loads pays attention to the attendance in his class. I said, I know, but I've got attendance left. I'm tired, I want to go home. And he said, that doesn't sound like Dale Disney. Mr. Rasmussen was calm, he was patient, he was always even-keeled, but just every so often, And maybe this doesn't work for everyone, but it sure worked for me. Every so often, just the right delivery of just a little bit of looming disappointment. That doesn't sound like you. I was in music history the next day. Sitting there, me and like 4 other people with Mr. Loads. It was worth it. For 16 years, I've been on the opposite side of these relationships, and I've had time to reflect and what I have found effective and what to do differently. And I've had time to look at students and go, that doesn't sound like you. I've had time to be on the opposite side of all of those situations. And while I do have other mentors, I'm talking to you about Mr. Rasmussen because it's been this summer right now about exactly 20 years since we all lost him. And so he's been particularly on my mind lately. I've been thinking a lot about how I've incorporated some of those lessons and what they've meant to me. I didn't have that long with him overall, and I reflected on the fact that this is my 16th year teaching, and that's 4 times overall total than the amount of time ever that I ever had with him and will have with him. And that's a little bit daunting, and yet it is absolutely the case. If you go into a competitive music school and you find yourself up against people that are definitely bigger fish than you, you might not come out the other side the same. And especially if you are somebody like me who had never really left home and was very anxious, little homebody of a person, that might even be more so. And throughout all of that journey of finding out what I was going to be on the other side of that, including going from somebody who was exceptionally terrified of being in front of people for any reason, and usually I stood in the back. I could get away with playing concerts without shoes on. The first time I had to do a concert where I was up front, I kind of had a little, very for real anxiety attack. On the front row singing in the choir, and all of a sudden it hit me like, oh, people can see me this time. To go from that, from not being able to handle it, to being able to talk to people for half an hour at a time, an hour at a time, an hour and a half at a time, every day, being dedicated to the craft of music history, whatever that means. Again, there's a quiz underneath your seats. Turn it in for 10 points extra credit on your overall average. His consistency and seeing how he was dedicated to us really inspired me in a lot of ways. When you carry an aspect of your mentor forward with you, that's something that you do by choice. And memory is imperfect, and it's always in motion. And you contribute to it, and in something that's even more interesting is it's something that you contribute to with others. Adam Blackstock, who was the other percussionist who graduated with me that year in 2005, we were the last 2 to graduate with Mr. Rasmussen as the percussion teacher. He was the grad student, and he did a anniversary concert for Mr. Rasmussen this year down at Troy State University, something along those lines in Alabama. He's the big percussion professor down there. But anyway, sorry, I get a lot off track. Sometimes I tell stories. It is reflected in my student evaluations every semester. I will not change. Sorry. But we all contribute to this legacy that Joe Rasmussen left us with in a variety of ways. And I think that's interesting, something I've reflected on. Adam Blackstock had his commemorative percussion ensemble concert. I'm doing this and trying to make sure that the flame gets carried a little bit. Every once in a while I get to go, hey, if you're kind of interested in musicology, why not you? I've seen you ride, you're pretty good at it. Why not you? Now look, you gotta be good. You gotta be dedicated to it. You gotta be ready to have a backup plan maybe. You gotta know what you're doing, Don't be like me and walk in and go, what do you want to study? Beethoven. And have Dr. Schiller from University of Georgia look at you and go, I don't know if you know this, but it's been done. Plan B, and then figure it out. But you can do it, why not? Why can't it be you? Why not? But we get to decide on which aspects of our mentors we propel forward in that way. And that's what I do. That's what I try to do, as opposed to, and also sometimes, maybe every once in a while, programming something like Steve Reich's clapping music. If you buy the right Steve Reich album and look at the personnel, it'll say Joseph Rasmussen. He played with him and recorded with him in the 70s. And so he introduced a lot of music like that to us. A lot of people in Greek philosophy or in medieval tradition, and these are areas that I look at a lot as a historian, in a similar way, passed on aspects of their mentors. And the reason that we know what a Socrates is, I'm sure you know who Socrates is. Maybe you've heard of it, right? You know, most of that, we only know it all because Aristotle, pardon me, Plato, minus 10 points. Plato, yes, Socrates to Plato to Augustine. There's the order. Wrote it down for us. Plato wrote down all these Socratic dialogues with the Socratic method, and that's our impression of Socrates. He did that for his mentor. And there's lots of debates about how much of that is actually Socrates, and if Socrates actually taught like that, how much of it was actually the person, and how much of it was sort of a catered impression that Plato passed down upon his broad shoulders. And by the way, Plato means broad. He was a wrestler. Without Plato doing that, maybe we don't know much about Socrates at all. Maybe Socrates wasn't real. Augustine, the Christian philosopher, did a similar thing with his mentor, Ambrosius. I wouldn't know some things about Ambrosius without Augustine, but Ambrosius, one thing we know about him thanks to Augustine, his student, is that Ambrosius could read without talking out loud, something that was very unique for the time. And Augustine, writing down things about his mentor, reflected upon the marvel of it. Bro in there is reading without saying it out loud. Whoa! Maybe I'm gonna try that. Aristotle remarks upon the human condition and says that we have the ability to remember and the ability to purposefully recollect. And I don't know if I even really understand the difference between those two things, but I think the story about Ambrosius and him reading without talking out loud, it's kind of indicative of the difference there. So I've been doing this about 16 years. I've led students to senior recitals. I've been part of programs that have been cut and had students come to me and say, what do we do now? I don't know. Mr. Rasmussen, what do we do now? One last thing, as we start to run down on time, is that Aristotle, talking about human condition again, talking about when you lose someone, says that lots of things change when you lose that person. Lots of things are altered. But their fact of a person, their personhood, is not. Mr. Rasmussen's not here for me to sometimes take these questions to, but the fact of Joe Rasmussen is immutable. And Aristotle said, and I think this is fairly profound, that in some ways, and this isn't a takeaway from the notion of grief, but in some ways, that personhood is illuminated a little bit. It's made complete in that grief and in that loss. You find that quiet place around it. I have, over time, started to call it a golden silence in the 20 years since. Abraham Lincoln, echoing something very similar in a letter to a woman who had lost someone, said, I've had experience enough to know what I say, and you only right now, need to believe it. The memory will be yet a sad feeling in your heart of a purer and holier sort than you have known before. As I've gone on through the years, there are lots of times where I can't really directly ask my mentor, what should I do? How do I handle this situation? How do I change as things have changed? Because it has been a minute since 2005 and things are different in some ways. Students are different in a lot of ways. But nonetheless, there is that immutable kind of quiet silence around that person that he was. It makes me face it with that quiet peace. And if you bring along that spirit of your mentor with you, you can help others grow. And sometimes, if you try very hard, and you're doing it right, the people you're working with will start to sprout. Maybe you'll see just the little seed of that same thing pop up elsewhere. May it be so.